Hey, Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Thanks for being here. Scott Walker coming up in just a few minutes. He's now the president of the Young America's Foundation, which is an amazing group. They work inside of our college campuses. They do great work. He's got a new movement coming up called the Long Game. So we'll talk with him coming up in a bit. Also, shout out to everyone watching us on Facebook Live right now. If you leave comments, I got it open right in front of me. We can read your comments throughout the show and obviously during the break and all that, if you leave good ones. Right now, we are in the midst of the largest border surge ever. Ever. Right now, as we speak, there are 15,000 unaccompanied minors, so no parents, 15,000 in custody right now, more coming. The media coverage has been a bit different. See if you can spot the difference.
Increasingly, Donald Trump is turning this nation into Nazi Germany and turning these into concentration camps.
I call this a concentration camp for kids.
Obviously, this is a problem that the Biden administration inherited from the Trump administration.
Babies in jail.
Babies in baby cages.
Challenges facing U.S. Border Patrol amid this migrant surge.
Babies in jail.
A very, very tough situation that the Biden administration now needs to contend with.
Something that's very difficult for the federal government to deal with at the border.
Children are being marched away to showers. I know they're being marched away to showers, just like the Nazis.
Babies in baby cages. Now it's, we have a slight overflow at our International Welcome Center. Listen, enough of the rhetoric and the vague generalities and this hack partisan spin. I want you to imagine something. Imagine you are a mother with 3 kids and you want to come to America. And the drug cartels, they come to you and they say, yeah, we'll help you out. But first you got to pick one. Pick one what? Pick one of your 3 kids and you can take that kid with you. We're going to take these other 2 and we're going to give them to these men over here. And the kids are going to help the men get across, because if these men go across by themselves, they're going to get sent right back, right? But if the men come across with the kids, then they're going to be given special treatment because they're now a family unit. Oh, yeah. And when we get across, we'll be sure to be all, we'll reunite you with your kids. Don't worry, they say. But you're that mother and you're not sure if you'll ever see your daughters again. And a lot of the time you don't, because they either never make it across the border at all. They're sold into sex slavery on the Mexican side. Or maybe they do. They do make it across because they need to be, help those other cartel members get across so they can go sell drugs in LA. But before they go sell drugs, they drop your daughter off at a brothel in Houston. Imagine the pain of that mother. And then imagine you are a politician or an activist who enables this. And they're called the compassionate ones. You and I are the racists and the bigots and the haters. Democrats get credit for being kind and caring and compassionate with their open border policies. But what do they think is actually happening? Right? They think it's all just hunky-dory as these migrants come across. New York Post has a headline: Mexico's ruthless drug cartels are using helpless children as decoys to smuggle their members into the U.S. Drug cartels are making a killing right now. $14 million a day they're making smuggling people across the border. We're going to talk more about that on tomorrow's show specifically. It costs thousands of dollars. You got to pay the coyotes to get across the border. Thousands of dollars. If you can't afford that, because who can in Guatemala, we'll get to that in a minute, you pay with your body. You pay with your body. You get sucked into prostitution. You're a sex slave for the rest of your life, or until they throw you in the garbage. That's the life for many of these little girls that are coming across the border. And the politicians who enable this are called the compassionate ones. I don't know what people have in their brain about illegal immigrants that come across. Like I don't. It's just like this very romantic, Statue of Liberty, these people, they just work hard. They just want to work hard. It's just the fewer the details, the better, right? It's very vague, right? They just want to make something of themselves and start a business, and they love America, right? And they just think about this made-up thing in their head, but they don't think about the little girl who comes across and becomes a sex slave at 16, and that's her America now. And you did that. You did that by enabling and allowing illegal immigration and the coyotes, the cartels, to run the show. What we need to do is have order at the border, where we know exactly who you are and where you're going. Are you going to be a massive burden to this country? Are you going to be a criminal? If you're 16, can we put you someplace where you don't become a sex slave? We need to know these things. Cartels don't care. We should. We played the end of this clip on yesterday's show. I want to play the beginning of it. This is ABC News.
This significant surge coming after President Biden ended Donald Trump's so-called Remain in Mexico policy, requiring asylum seekers to wait there for their court proceedings. Since then, many of those tent cities along the Mexican border have emptied out as people start streaming in.
Sorry, I was reading the Facebook comments. I got distracted for a second. Do you love that line? The border towns are emptying out. Right? They're emptying out. We have no idea who's there. We have no idea. We have no idea who is there. We have no idea who's going to make it across. We have no idea if they even made it across, if they made it across alive. But we do know the drug cartels got rich. And then the elites here pat themselves on the back. And we talked about yesterday how they're not affected at all either, right? They're not affected at all. Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, there's no Guatemalans living in his pool house. There's no Hondurans going to his kids' private school. They're not affected at all. His wages don't go down. I'm not being smug or anything with this question. This is a completely honest, legitimate question for Democrats listening now. What's the end for you? I don't know the right way to ask it. Like, what's enough? Or how many illegal immigrants are too many? Not legal, that's a different question, right? Remember, Donald Trump was number 1, number 3, and number 10 when it came to granting asylum for people over the last 40 years, right? So you take the last 40 years, number of people granted asylum. Donald Trump was number 1, number 3, and number 10, okay? So we accept plenty of legal immigrants and asylum seekers. That's a wonderful thing. I'm talking about illegal immigrants. Is there too many illegal immigrants? There has to be, right? There has to be. I think about this a lot. So I was a swimmer growing up, but you could do this with track or anything. So in swimming, world record for the 50 freestyle, down and back. It's like 18 seconds. Right? 100 years ago, it was like 25 seconds. And if you told someone 100 years ago, when the world record was 25, the world record one day is gonna be 18 seconds, they'd be like, no, it's impossible. There's no way it can be 18 seconds. Someone today, where the world record's 18 seconds, they'll be like, oh, one day the world record is gonna be 12 seconds. Like, no, it can't be 12. No one can, like, that's impossible. So you think, like, there's a terminal velocity. Like, you can only go so fast, right? The world record right now in the 100-meter dash is 9.5. Okay, Usain Bolt. No one's gonna run it in 2 seconds, right? You know what I mean? So there's like a limit. And now so that's on the fast side. But on the big side, like, there has to be a limit to how many illegal immigrants you'll allow in America. There has to be a limit. 7 billion? That's the population of the world, okay? So 7 billion. Would you be okay with 7.6 billion people coming to America illegally? Obviously not, okay? We can't have 7.6 billion. So we now establish there is a limit, okay? So what's the limit? Where do you draw the line? 1 billion? And I'm being totally serious here. 1 billion. How about, do we double the population of America? 330 million. You're okay with 330 million illegal immigrants? Okay, that's too many. Okay, how about all of Guatemala? Are you okay with all of Guatemala moving into America? No? Yes, maybe. Half of Guatemala? What's your end game? Is there any number that's too many? I mean that totally seriously. What's the number that's too many? Or is it just, you just ignore it? Whatever, we'll see what happens, take it day by day. 59% of people in Guatemala live below the world poverty line. I'm talking world poverty line. The poverty line in America is like 40 grand, all right? I'm talking the world poverty line. That's $1.90 a day, all right? 59% of people in Guatemala live under $1.90 a day. That's 10 million Guatemalans. So are you cool with taking the entire population of Georgia? It's 10 million people. 10 million Guatemalans living in poverty. Is that your limit? I don't know. When will Democrats, and I don't mean that pejoratively, I mean that descriptively, right? Democrats are in power in every level of government in California, where I live, in DC certainly, and many other states. When will a Democrat leader say, at what point would a Democrat leader say, all right, okay, let's slow this down a bit. Okay, let's make sure we know what's going on. I don't know if they ever will, because as we talked about yesterday with masks, when something becomes political, it becomes tribal. When something becomes tribal, we become primal. And when we become primal, we stop using our brains. And no one who's in the tribe of being open borders is ever going to support a policy that Donald Trump has supported. So I don't know if Democrats will ever say enough's enough. There's 15,000 unaccompanied children right now in Border Patrol custody. There's 5,000 in Border Patrol, 10,000 in Health and Human Services, but 15,000 in federal government control. There's one facility in Texas that was designed to hold 250 immigrants. They now have 4,000. That's 1,500% its normal capacity. What are we doing? Will it ever end? So why are they continuing it? Obviously, the left sees these people as Democratic voters, no doubt about that. They pretend, maybe even lie to themselves, that they're doing this for the best interests of these people. There's a way to do it properly, though, for everyone involved, immigrants included, and they know that. It's about more Democratic voters. It's about increasing, from the activist perspective, it's about increasing the Hispanicness of America. I don't care at all about the racial breakdown of this country. It means nothing. Cultural differences matter. All right, we talk more about that one tomorrow too. But more than anything, and I think you, we want order and equality under the law for everybody. We want known laws. And I want a sovereign country that decides these things for ourselves. I don't want an immigration policy dictated by other countries. And I want to make sure that the services that we provide to Americans are properly given before they're overrun by people from other countries. This seems entirely reasonable. And I refuse to have someone tell me that I'm racist or not compassionate for believing these things. Again, it's easy for the elite to think that this is all no big deal. Right? The elite who send their kids to private schools, they're not going to have any Hondurans in there who don't speak English. But you compare that to the lower income American families who may be the only kid who speaks English in his kindergarten class. I'm not exaggerating. The other reason why activists want to open borders and have no border is they feel like America's stolen land to begin with. And we're just restoring it to the way it was before America came in and stole our land. Borders, they think borders are a form of apartheid. They're racist. Right? Progressives have this globalist vision. And borders obviously get in the way of us all becoming global citizens, united as one. It's a utopian, foolish, naive vision of the world. The true story is, we should get to decide where our immigrants come from. It's not just who gets here first. We should be able to decide from what region of the world immigrants come from, and literally what region even of Guatemala they come from. We need to factor in cultural differences and cultural similarities and decide who to let in. It can't just be a free-for-all. True story. Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. Scott Walker, former governor of Wisconsin, of course, coming up next. But he's on to bigger and better things now. That's why I forgot. That's all in the past. In the future, he's now the president of the Young America's Foundation. So we'll talk with him coming up in just the next segment. First, I want to talk about the shooting that took place in Colorado the other day. Killer going in and killing 10 people in a grocery store. Before we go on here, something we gotta be aware of about the times that we live in, because this has never happened before. It's all we ever know, but it's never happened before. When something bad happens in Colorado or Atlanta, like last week, it's news everywhere in the country, no matter where you are. Where are you right now? It doesn't matter. You're inundated with all the bad stories everywhere, right? All the bad stories in the country you are bombarded with, and we're not made for that. We're not made for that. We're not designed for that. How many mass shootings have there been in your town where you live? So I live in San Diego. It's a big city. There's been 3 in the last 40 years. 3 too many, of course, but you can wrap your head around 3 in a lifetime. We're mentally capable of understanding that, or something, right? Does that make sense? But the amount of tragic stories that we're bombarded with constantly, we were not designed to handle. You're designed to handle what's in your neighborhood, right? You're not designed to take in every mass shooting and tragic event that happens all around the world. So no wonder we seem overwhelmed and anxious and panicking all the time. We're just plugged into this matrix of trauma, and it's messing with us. So that's just first thing to realize as you tune into the news. I don't want to comment too much on the shooting yet until we know more about it. Shocking, I know, right? I want to wait till we know facts before we discuss them. We can talk about the media's reaction to it, though. We got a handy-dandy guide here on, I think we have it here, right? Handy-dandy guide to media's reaction, media's narrative to when there's a shooting, right? So what does the media do when there's a shooting? Well, it's easy, right? This is put together by John Gabriel. It's based on the identity of the attacker and the identity of the victim. Okay, so for instance, if a non-white attacker, all right, if a non-white attacker attacks a non-white victim, you do nothing. You just ignore it. That's Chicago. You do nothing at all. If you have a white shooter against a non-white victim, oh, well, then the story is racism and white supremacy. That was last week in Atlanta, right? White guy killed 6 Asian women and a Hispanic and a white guy too, but those are ignored. And it becomes this huge Asian hate crime thing, which isn't even a thing, right? But that was last week. Now, if you have a non-white shooter who kills a white person, right? So non-white shooter kills a white person or white people, then it's a gun control narrative. And that's what we have here on cue, just as always. Now, at first, it's a little trickier. At first, everyone assumed that the shooter was white. So the media went with the narrative about white supremacy, right? They started off with the whole white supremacy thing. I got all the tweets from all the blue check marks talking about how this is a white shooter because he was taken into custody by police. If it was a black man, he would have been killed, blah, blah, blah. I got all the tweets to prove that. But then it came out that the shooter was a Syrian immigrant named Ahmad al-Aliwi Alisa. That's different. Now we have an entire weeks of stories that were already written that had to be flushed down the toilet. Now, don't feel too bad for the media. Not too difficult for them. It's an easy pivot over to gun control again, right? Because again, now we have a non-white shooter kills white people, gun control, right? We didn't even know who the victims were. And Biden came out and said this.
I want to be very clear. This is the one thing I do know enough to say on in terms of what's happened there. While we're still waiting for more information regarding the shooter, his motive, the weapons he used, the guns, the magazines, the weapons, the modifications that apparently have taken place to those weapons that are involved here, I don't need to wait another minute, let alone an hour, to take common sense steps that will save the lives in the future and to urge my colleagues in the House and Senate to act. We can ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines in this country once again. I got that done when I was a senator. It passed. It was law for the longest time. And it brought down these mass killings. We should do it again. We can close the loopholes in our background check system.
No, it did not bring down mass shootings, but that was the 1994 crime bill, gun bill he's talking about. And 2 months later, the Republicans won back the House. And even Bill Clinton said that one of the reasons why Republicans won back the House is because of that gun bill. So keep pushing, Joe. Obama even came out of the woodwork with this tweet as well. Now, just to drive home the media narrative point here, if this guy turns out to be an Islamic extremist, right? If he turns out to be a terrorist, well, then we have a Muslim killing non-Muslims, right? And the narrative then will be reaction to Islamophobia. So Islamophobia was to blame. So if that turns out to be the case, then get ready for a week of stories about anti-Muslim hate crimes. And then people are going to start making up stories about how they were on a bus and there was a Muslim woman and people on the bus were harassing her. So other passengers stepped to her defense and started this hashtag campaign, hashtag I'll ride with you. And the whole thing never happened. That is one of my favorite all-time stories. That story right there, that goes back to, 2014. There was this terrorist attack in Sydney. And this woman told this whole harrowing tale about how she was on the bus and this Muslim woman was being harassed and she stepped up and I'll ride with you. And it started the whole thing never happened. Never happened. Made it all up. That for me was like such a pivotal moment in my understanding of how things are spread and how things are shared and how things are made up and how narratives are made. We'll save that full story for another day. Similarly, if the terrorist killed Christians, then the motive will be, or the narrative will be the Crusades. And now the Crusades are to blame. Anyway, this is Mina Harris. This is Kamala Harris's niece. She's a feminist, children's book author, etc. This was right when the shooting happened. She said, the Atlanta shooting was not even a week ago. Violent white men are the greatest terrorist threat to our country. Violent white men. Ooh. Strong words. Then it came out, the guy's not white. And she said, well, I deleted a previous tweet about the suspect in the Boulder shooting. I made an assumption based on his being taken into custody alive and the fact that the majority of mass shootings in the US are carried out by white men. So still white men's fault. I want to break here and get to Scott Walker one more time with the former governor, but I'll end with this point. Atheists often accuse Christians of using this tactic, if you will. It's called God of the gaps. And it's used to explain things that can't be explained, right? So if there's something that can't be explained, Christians will say, oh, God did it, right? And atheists don't like that. They're like, no, that's not good enough. You need more than just God did it. Ben Shapiro made a great point that the left has a political version of this. It's called white supremacy of the gaps. And whenever something can't be explained, or before we take any time to actually get any of the facts, who cares if it can be explained or not? Doesn't even matter. It's just going to come out anyway. And just fill in the gaps with white supremacy. Do that, and the media thinks it'll be just fine. Scott Walker, coming up next. True story. Mike Slater. Spread the word.
America is under siege. We see it on our campuses and in our culture. The left started its takeover of our colleges and culture over a half-century ago. And the new administration is working to take over everything we hold dear. That's why, as the new president of Young America's Foundation, we're launching The Long Game. The Long Game is a bold plan that will invest in our young people for generations to come. It's built on the foundation of a national organization with roots that stretch across the country, an organization that has a proven record of educating young Americans about the ideals of individual liberties, free enterprise, and traditional values. This is about enacting a plan that outlasts me and you.
Beautiful. Governor Walker's with us right now. Scott Walker, how are you, sir?
I'm well. Thanks for having me on, and thanks for playing a little bit of that promo. It tells you exactly what we're doing with the long game.
Well, I'm excited about it. And you personally, you could have really done anything after being governor and right now, but you chose to take the fight to college campuses? Why did you find that to be the most important place to be?
Well, I'm a fighter. A decade ago, we saw the Occupy movement didn't start on Wall Street. It started on my street in Madison, Wisconsin, when they brought about 100,000 protesters to occupy our state capitol. They tried to cancel us. They tried to intimidate us. They ultimately tried to recall us, but we prevailed, and our common sense conservative reforms work still today. And I looked at the next great battlefield is really with our young people, not only on college campuses, but even in our schools, where the left's been at this for decades. And we can't win just the next battle. We've got to win the war for the heart and soul of our republic, and that starts with our young people.
Take us back through the beginnings of the march through the institutions that we've talked about a ton of time on this show. But when would you say it really started in our colleges, and how has it metastasized and grown? We need to know where it and how it started if we want to fight back against it, right?
Yeah, it goes all the way back, really, to Saul Alinsky in decades ago in the 1960s. I remember the warnings even before I was in school, and certainly in my time in the 80s in college, we saw left-wing professors, but as conservatives, we still had a voice. We could still be heard. We could bring in speakers. We could challenge things in classes. That has changed, particularly over the last decade, and I would argue, particularly in the last year, we've seen a major thrust where it's not even just intimidating to be a conservative on campus for fear of a bad grade from one of these left-wing professors. I think it's even worse these days for the radical activists on campus and even those coming in from off campus who really just try to outright shut down not only conservative students, but speakers and others. They don't want any of these voices to be heard, and that is truly dangerous. Free speech is guaranteed in our Constitution, but it should be most revered on our college campuses, and yet that's where it's most at risk. That's where we got to fight back.
Let's talk about these speakers and these professors coming in, because as you said, what you did in Wisconsin was amazing and took incredible courage. So what's your advice to people who are speaking on college campuses as these speeches are getting shot down? So like practical advice, right? But also just philosophical advice about not backing down.
Well, one of the practical level, anytime we face protesters, because I still get them today, and that is you just kill them with kindness. Stay focused on the truth. Realize your audience is not the protesters. It's those, particularly on a college campus, it's those young men and young women who show up, who really are up in the air, who want to learn more, who are hungry for facts, who want to hear the give and take of not just a speech, but of how you respond to some of the radical claims and attempts to shut people down in the Q&A time in many of our questions. And all of our YF events have exactly that. So talk to them, speak to them. And the other big thing I tell not only speakers, but any of our students is, for years, those of us on the right have thought and talked with our head. The left thinks and talks with their hearts. We need to combine the two. We need to keep the logic of our brain, be logical, base it on facts, unlike the left, don't just be about feelings, but tell it in ways that share it from the heart. Good example of this, we had one of our first in-person events in Miami last month, our Freedom Conference, and we talked about by bringing people in whose families come from Cuba, whose family came from Venezuela, one of the speakers, and talked about the personal experiences their families had with the oppression that comes out of socialist-run countries versus the freedom and opportunity that their families so love here in America. We need to tell the facts, but tell it in ways that appeal emotionally as well. And I think that's a great way to fight back, because then those people in the middle look at that and say, yeah, that makes sense. I'm going to listen to this person as opposed to these divisive folks who want to break us apart and pit us one against the other. That's what the left's doing. We need to push back on it.
So good. We are storytelling people, and I felt for the longest time conservatives, we have the story, but we're just not great at telling the story, right? I think of Ronald Reagan, he told that amazing story. I think it was his farewell address about there was a Navy sailor out there, and there was a boat off of Cuba, a little raft, and he said, "Hello, freedom man."
The freedom man, freedom soldier.
Stories. Yeah. So why? And well, let me ask you. Give me one. Give me one of these stories. Something that moved you, and you think can move someone who's maybe in the middle or apolitical.
Well, a good example I had when I was governor, they were coming at me, the unions attacking, and I said, hey, Megan Sampson, a first-year teacher in Milwaukee, English teacher, was named the Outstanding English Teacher of the Year. That year, the year before I was governor, she got laid off. Why? Because the old union contract said the last hired is the first fired, the last in is the first out. And most people say, well, that's not fair. How could a great dynamic teacher like that be getting a pink slip? Well, that's the way things were under the old union contracts, under collective bargaining. We got rid of that, and that means now schools can put the best and the brightest in the classroom by getting rid of tenure, getting rid of seniority, really putting the best people in the classroom. That was a very compelling story and started the turnaround from where I was, dipping into the low 30s in the polling when first things started. By the time the recall came around, we told stories like that, and people went, yeah, that totally makes sense. I think for young people, the more they can hear from not only people who've come from socialist countries, we've got speakers and staff who've come from old Soviet bloc countries. They tell the stories. One in particular who works at the Reagan Ranch, her dad was in prison, sent to Siberia, because he was speaking out the gospel as a preacher. Thankfully, he got out and escaped, and they came to America, where their life completely changed. The more we tell stories like that and tell the real story of what happens with communism and socialism versus the freedoms we have here, the better off we're going to be.
It's beautiful, and it always ends with a point of gratitude, which is what is severely lacking, I would say, with young people about where we are and how we got here. It's wonderful. Governor, for you personally, you mentioned you were in the 30s at a point during your trials as governor and all that, and as you were being attacked. What was the low point for you emotionally throughout that? Because as courageous as you were, there's no way you were just like on the top of your game for that entire year, right? So what was the moment for you when you were like, this is really tough for me and my family?
It was at the very onset when we went from hundreds to thousands to tens of thousands of people. We were surrounded in the Capitol. We were trapped. We felt it was effective. You feel isolated. You feel intimidated. There were death threats against me, against my wife, against my children. Heck, one of them actually said they were going to gut my wife like a deer. Just awful, horrible things. And you felt like, in fact, my wife even said, why are we doing this? What is going on? And the best thing I did was get out of the Capitol. In the Capitol, you're in this literally in this dome, but figuratively in this dome of silence from the outside world. When I went around the state, and I would go get out, and I'd tour, and I'd go to factories, and I'd go to farms. I remember so many people would come up to me and literally reach out and say, Governor, we're praying for you. And that was such a transformational sense. And that's why, again, I apply that to young people on our campuses, which is, again, why we're pushing this long game. Because I think the left wants them to feel isolated. They want them to feel like they're alone, that nobody else shares their values. And the more we can get out and say, no, you're not alone, the more we bring them to conferences and hold events and bring in speakers where they hear, hey, other people think like we think. This is not a radical idea. This is a rational, reasonable idea, the better off we're going to be. And that, for me, was something I'm trying to take to the work we're doing, again, not only in college campuses, but even with K through 12 education.
So good. Gosh, I love the idea. I love the visual of getting out of the chaos and the echo chamber of the dome and going out into the woods and just talking to people and finding the peace and comfort and truth there. I love it. So let's get to the long game. So what is it? What exactly are you going to be doing on college campuses? Because my oldest kid is 4, so you got 14 years to turn this around, Governor, before I'm willing to send my kid back to my alma mater.
And we're going to do just that. I'm absolutely confident. The left has been good at doing this. We're in the battle of the day, and I'm not saying we shouldn't be engaged in that, but we've got to have this long view to turn things around, because it's going to take longer than just a news cycle and even maybe a presidential cycle. But the long game is a 12-point plan. Again, if people want the details, we'll send it to you absolutely free. YAF.org/long game, and it's 12 action points. Give you a good example one. Right now, YAF is active supporting students on over 2,000 campuses all across America. But that's not enough. There's 4,000 plus campuses in this country. We got to be on all of them. That's part of the long game plan. When I look at not only undergraduates, I say I want to be in 2-year associate degree programs, because I know those young men and women out there are smart, practical people who want to get into the workforce faster. We need to have a program for them, and nobody really has a program for associate degree students out there. We need to not only be on college campuses with speakers and programs and conferences at historic levels, unlike we've ever done before. We've got to be in high school and even in junior high, even to the point of even going into elementary school and 4th and 5th 5th grade and giving not just the students but parents the tools and materials they need to counter things like the 1619 Project and all the talk about Marxism and hating America. We need to reinforce that this country was built on strong Judeo-Christian values, that the founders were icons and continue to be today, and that those founding principles still matter. Those are things we can do even with young kids like yours. We can give you those tools and start you down the right path even before they get into college, because by the time they're in college, it's almost too late if we haven't started to have an impact sooner, because the left is doing it. They've even pushed things as simple as in Ames, Iowa, we exposed on our tip line, the local school district there started with a BLM week of action, where they're literally giving coloring pages to kindergartners talking about transgenderism and how they can pick their own sex and how fathers don't have to be a part of the household. That is garbage. That is nonsense. They're trying to indoctrinate our children. We've got to push back on that, and we can and we will.
These stories, they need to be told to our kids as well. We had this great book from Bill Bennett, a kid's book about, there's one called Virtue and there's one about America. Now, it's all the great stories about America that you can't share anymore. I saw there on one of those bullet points was about professors. How do we get conservative, or not to be conservative, just decent people, honest people in these professorships?
Well, you're right about that. That's why one of our bullet points is we know the left tries to intimidate and make people feel isolated as students, but I think that's equally, if not more so true with our educators, whether it's in K through 12, our dynamic, wonderful people that want to teach our children in school, or most certainly our professors. You know, for all the talk about diversity, one of the few places where they embrace diversity is ideological or thought-based diversity out there. And so we know that there are a good number of teachers and educators who are not only conservative, but the larger number, I think, just want to be objective. They just want to provide truth to their students. And so we've got a whole program set up to reach out to them, to let them know, again, that they're not alone, to give them the resources and the backing. I remember my son, Matt, who's 26 today, way back years ago in high school, had an AP government class, and the teacher there was a wonderful teacher. She tried to be really objective. She brought in Republican and Democrat speakers, had different sorts of signs and posters and banners up in her room that reflected all different backgrounds. But one day, Matt, my son, came back with a textbook assignment, and the textbook talked about how Reagan's tax cuts had brought about the deficits of the 1980s. Well, anybody who followed Reagan and tax policy knows just the opposite is true. Actually, revenues went up under the tax cuts. It was Tip O'Neill and the House Democrats that spent above and beyond that caused the deficits. We need to get those facts out. Excuse me. And even when they're even when you got a good teacher, sometimes even the curriculum passed on to them or the very textbook they have is out of touch with reality. We need to give them counter materials, and that's a big part of the long game as well.
I'm so excited. All right, last question for you, Governor. What is the biggest hurdle practically towards making this happen, and then also just human nature-wise? What's the biggest hurdle for YAF?
Well, two parts. Technically, it's free speech infringements. We've got, in fact, if you go to yaf.org/the long game is how you get it, but yaf.org/free speech, we've got a whole series of cases we're involved in, some that we've won, some that are still pending. But you'd be amazed. Free speech is guaranteed in the U.S. Constitution. It should be revered on our college campuses, and yet it's these days the most at risk on our college campuses and universities across this country. And so we're going to push back. We've got the Constitution on our side. It's one of our big points, action points in this long game plan. But it's amazing. We should never even have to be spending a penny on these lawsuits and legal actions. But that's a huge hurdle just to get in there. And they claim they're for free speech. But watch what they actually do. Many of these administrators, or even sometimes student government leaders, put on unfair burdens. They block the time you can have it. They put one instance, we had at UC Berkeley 3 times the security fees that they charged a left-leaning group. We won in each of those cases, and we'll win with the ones pending, but we shouldn't have to be engaged in that. We should be able to spend our resources on the speakers and the materials instead of the legal battles, but we'll take that on anywhere, anytime, any place across America, including in our K through 12 education institutions, because we've got to have the chance to get that voice out. And practically, I think it's, again, going back to this theme of letting students know that they're not alone, The left has really been effective at isolating them. For all the talk about divisiveness, I think it's the left that's divisive. If you don't agree with them, they try to shut you down. They claim you're racist or sexist or transphobic or whatever the phrase of the day is. We need to let people know that we're the ones that want to bring people together. You know, our view is, hey, as long as you don't hurt the health and safety of your neighbor, go out and do your thing. Live your life. Pursue your piece of the American dream. We don't care where you come from. We don't care what you look like. We don't care your family background. We want everyone in America to do better. We love this country. We love our families. And we want to make sure that all of our neighbors' families do equally as well. And that's something that can unite us versus the divisiveness of the left. And that's a key part of the long game.
Governor, what this is, it's big and it's important, and I'm super grateful you're at the helm of it, sir. Best of luck, YAF.org. Thank you so much, Scott.
My pleasure. Keep fighting for freedom.
Yeah, man, we're doing it together. YAF.org. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, here's a headline. Mouse embryos grow successfully in beakers, a step towards an artificial womb. Excuse me? Excuse me, what? Marilyn Singleton is here. Dr. Singleton, how are you, doctor?
I am just fine until you showed that awful picture, but...
Well, sorry about that. What are we doing here? What is happening? What did they do exactly? And then what are the implications for human beings potentially in the future that we need to ethically grasp?
Well, I'll tell you something. You're seeing the story about the mouse embryo, but they have done this with human embryos, and as far back as 2016. And the thing what they do is take stem cells, fetal stem cells, which are the kind of cells that can turn into all different kinds of organs versus adult stem cells that if you take the skin, it will turn into skin. If you take blood, it'll turn into blood, that type thing. But they did that back in 2016 and got the fetus up to 14 days. And there's an international rule that says you can't grow human fetuses beyond 14 days because that's when the cells start to actually turn into specific body parts, just like the picture you're showing where there's beating hearts. You can see that it's going to be a head and all that. And the kind of disgusting part is this International Society for Stem Cell Research wants to change that guideline. They want to expand that out, and they're coming out with new guidelines this May, and I cringe on what they might be.
Wow, it's pretty amazing, and I use this when I give my pro-life speeches. I talk about that 14-day mark, where the primitive streak, where the spine begins to form, that the international scientific community says this is when life begins. Like, we're not going past 14 days because it's too human even for us. That's a pretty amazing thing for the pro-life cause. Alas, as you said, we may be going past that. What's like your dark dystopian vision for full on if they move in this direction?
Well, I'll tell you something. Research has shown, and more papers are coming out, that sperm counts have gone down by 59% in the last 40 years. And more of the DNA in sperm is kind of soiled in some way. So what I can see is creating humans at will, that after humans are depopulated for one reason or another, if you can do this, then you can create soldiers, workers, whatever class of people you want. And, you know, as much as they say, oh, this will help us find cures for diseases, et cetera, the way things are going and the way things have been used in ways that were never even thought of, that is really very scary. And this dovetails into so-called non-traditional families where you have two people of the same sex. And if they want to have a child, they're getting away from the words mother and father and only using the words parents. And this way you can have parents and men can get pregnant, and completely throwing off our normal family structure.
30 seconds or so. What are the ethical concerns? Like, I don't know what the ethical concerns are of growing an ear with stem cells, but it's got to be different when you're growing a human being. So how do you think about that?
Absolutely. Well, one thing that I find interesting is it certainly helps define what life is, and it may work for the pro-life movement. Not that you want to create life in a test tube, but hey, you're creating life, and so you're creating it from day one, essentially.
Yeah.
It's wrong, and I don't personally, and so many physicians feel that no matter what the technology is, there's some bounds that you just don't cross.
Just because you can doesn't mean you should. How many people are going to stop and think, should we do this, even if we can? Dr. Singleton, thank you for your time, ma'am.
Thank you.
Appreciate you. We are headed towards odd times if we don't get back to basics. Get back to the truth. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word.